Herod had John beheaded and his head brought in on a platter. John's disciples came and took his body and laid it in a tomb. Then they went and told Jesus. At the same time, the apostles returned to Jesus and reported to him all that they had done. Two things are happening here simultaneously, very different things. On the one hand, the disciples of John come and tell Jesus the awful news of John's ghastly death. Imagine Jesus' emotions. This is his cousin, after all, and his forerunner. He must have felt angry. He must have felt disgusted. He certainly felt deep sorrow. Maybe even a frisson of fear. John is gone. My turn is next. How do you handle such negative emotions? But at the same time, the apostles come back from their first missionary trip, bubbling with excitement at all that they have done. They've cast out demons, they've healed the sick, they are buzzing with excitement. How does Jesus handle these two things at the same time? He has one instant reaction. He wants to be alone. He says to the disciples, "Come with me by yourself to a quiet place and rest a while." He seeks out solitude. And in case we don't get the message, the next verse says it 3 times in one sentence. He withdrew privately by boat to a solitary place. This is the 6th time in just 6 chapters of Mark that Jesus has looked for solitude. He knew now that he needed it in his time of distress. He also knew that the disciples needed it in their time of success. Success is a dangerous thing. It can go to our heads, and so Jesus' reaction is to withdraw them from the crowd, from the adulation, so that they can reset their compass and their priorities. He also knew that it's a dangerous time just after you've been very busy, and especially after you've been giving out spiritually. Every pastor knows that Monday is his most vulnerable day. Look how Jonah collapsed after a successful ministry at Nineveh. He wanted to die. Jesus knew at times of success or distress, we need solitude. In the ministry, I made it a habit from time to time to go and visit what I perceived as successful pastors. By successful, I mean much more than numbers and that sort of thing. And one day I took a plane to Johannesburg just to see Costas Tithakis, a Methodist minister that was having a big impact. And for 2 hours, he shared with me the secrets of his ministry. But at the end of these interviews, I always asked one more question. I said, "Costa, out of all that you've told me, what would you say is the biggest secret of your ministry?" And he paused just for a moment and he looked at me and he said, "Time for Costa and God. Time for Costa and God." During my ministry, I frequently ran weekend retreats where we would spend about 2/3 of the time in silence. I must say it wasn't a big seller. I used to struggle sometimes to get people to come on those retreats. But some people thrived on them and it became central to their spiritual lives. Others couldn't take it. I had at least 2 big men, and by big I mean big in business, big in church leadership, who got in their cars and went home. They couldn't take it. Why? All I was asking them to do was to be quiet. Because in times of solitude and silence, those wild beasts arise within us, our fears, our temptations, and we have to face them. If I can't sit down and face the wild beasts within me, I'll always be on the run. And so Jesus, in his grief, seeks out solitude. But his grief is interrupted. There must have been a very light breeze on the Sea of Galilee that day, because all the people did was walk around the lake and they got there before the boat arrived. And Jesus gets out of the boat longing for solitude, and there's the crowd. I must confess in the ministry that sometimes when people interrupted me on my day off, I felt a little bit of anger, unless it was something important. But not a stitch of that with Jesus. How did he manage that? I believed he managed it because of a fundamental secret of Jesus' life. He was always aware of being on 2 journeys at the same time. On the one hand, he had what I like to call a journey inward. That's where you deal with your emotions, your thinking, your temptations, and where you meet with your God. But at the same time, he was always aware of his journey outward, that to which God had called him in the world. We all need to breathe in and breathe out. And when Jesus gets out of the boat, although he's longing for solitude, He sees the crowd and he has compassion on them because that's his outward calling. And he ministers to them all day, exhausting ministry. We'll look at that day's ministry in the next talk. But his grief is only interrupted. His solitude is only postponed. We read that at the end of the day, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. Then he went up on a mountainside to pray. By the end of the day, his need for solitude is so great that he can't even share it with his disciples. He goes up alone to be with God on his own. Time for Jesus and God. Time for Costa and God. Time for you and me and God.